What we're doing right now is we're doing a mock-up. It's basically a wall section that is showing the construction of the home that we're building on the museum property. And so where it all begins is just like a typical home that you would have built in any subdivision in America, which is this part of the home. This right here. This is what we would consider the structural walls. This is what holds the house up. This is what you would count on for, you know, for wind and for rain and to keep the house upright. So this looks like the construction of any typical home that would be built anywhere. Where it takes a little bit of a turn is this material out here, which is, it's called a SIP, which is a structural insulated panel. And this is applied to the outside of the structure of the house, and it creates a hyper insulated home. And that's how we're able to achieve a passive house. We hyper seal this house, and it's with materials that are readily available, but they're usually not used in this application. Right at this line right here, there's an imaginary line that runs all the way around the perimeter of the house. It creates an envelope that doesn't allow any air to get in from the outside. It's hyper sealed. And so the materials that we use look like this. And this is a very sticky, modified rubber material. And this gets applied to all of the seams and all of the areas on the outside of the structural home that typically air would get into. All the corners, all the seams, at the base details, around each one of the windows, around each one of the doors. When we come out to the site, we're going to come out to the site with a series of these structural walls already made up. They're going to be made up in anywhere from 16 to 28 foot lengths. And we're going to take them off of a flatbed truck, and we're going to crane them into place. We're going to lift them into place with a crane, and we're going to build that house just like you would normally build a house. And we put the trusses on the top, we put the sheeting on the outside, no window cutouts. We put the sheeting on the ceiling of the second floor, and then we seal up all the joints. So now you've got a really super sealed house. We actually do an air test at that point, which it's called a blower door test, where you would seal right over the front door of the house, put a small hole into it, put an exhaust fan that actually sucks all the air out of the house, and they can gauge how many air changes per hour there are that come into that little opening. Tells you how sealed your house really is. And for a certified passive house, it has to meet certain criteria where you could have a certain amount of air changes per hour, and that's it. At that point, then we bring our structural insulated panels out to the site. These come in sizes that are about 8 feet wide, and they're full height from the lower sill plate all the way up to the trusses on the roof. So in this case, in this house, they will be 8 foot wide, 22 feet high, and they'll come in. We'll take a crane, put those into place with a crane. They actually put together, they spline together almost like Legos, and then you put them on one at a time and wrap the house all the way around. Now there's actually these really long screws that get put in from the outside, and they're going to be attached. There's 3 attachment points. One is at the roof level, one is at the mid-level of the house, and one is at the sill level of the house at the bottom. So in a typical 8 foot wide SIP, structural insulated panel, you're probably going to have about 24 screws total. It would be 8, 8, 8. The screws actually do cause an air barrier break. They're made of metal, so they're going to transfer cold from wherever the exterior of the house is to wherever the screw ends. For our purposes, it's negligible the amount of transference that they cause, because they end up inside of a solid piece of wood. So it'll transfer cold into the inside of that solid piece of wood, and that's where it stops. And that's all figured into the passive house criteria. We know that that's going to happen. We know that we need those to hold the house up, but it's okay because it's all been figured into the model. At that point, we've got to install our windows. So we've already installed our air infiltration barrier at all of the points in between the SIP and the structural home. We cut all the openings out. We install that window from the inside. We put it in from the inside, and it gets screwed through the jamb right into the structural part of the house. There's a small gap, which would be typical, between the actual window and the structural part of the home. This material goes in that gap to cover that up, to create, to stop the air from moving in from the outside to the inside. And so we're covered. We're covered as far as air infiltration. We're covered as far as insulation now. So we've got a high degree of insulation. And so really at that point, we're ready to go for our passive house.